The United States has not captured Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro. This scenario is hypothetical. However, we can explore what might prompt such an action and potential subsequent steps, acknowledging that it's based on a speculative premise. Let's assume, hypothetically, that the US government were to capture Nicolás Maduro. Several justifications might be cited, although their legality under international law would be highly contentious. First, the US Justice Department has indicted Maduro on drug trafficking and narco-terrorism charges. The US could argue that the capture was an act of law enforcement to bring an indicted individual to justice within the US legal system. Second, the US has, at times, asserted a responsibility to protect democratic principles globally. They might claim that Maduro's government is illegitimate, suppresses human rights, and undermines democracy, justifying intervention to restore democracy in Venezuela. This justification is often met with skepticism, as it can be perceived as a pretext for pursuing US strategic interests. Third, if Maduro's actions were perceived as an imminent threat to US national security, a highly improbable scenario, but theoretically possible, the US might invoke the right to self-defense, although this would require extremely compelling evidence. However, capturing a sitting head of state is an act fraught with legal and political complexities, violating international norms of sovereignty and potentially triggering significant international backlash. Assuming such a capture did occur, here are potential next steps. First, Maduro would likely be immediately transported to the United States to face the charges outlined in the indictment against him. He would be arraigned, and a trial would be scheduled. Second, a massive international outcry would be expected. Venezuela, along with its allies like Cuba, Russia, and China, would vehemently condemn the action as a violation of international law and an act of aggression. The United Nations Security Council would likely be convened, although any resolution condemning the US would likely be vetoed. Third, the situation inside Venezuela would become extremely volatile. Maduro's supporters might launch protests or even violent uprisings. The Venezuelan military, already divided in its loyalties, could fracture further, potentially leading to civil war. Fourth, the US would likely face pressure to establish some form of interim government in Venezuela. This could involve recognizing Juan Guaido, previously recognized by the US as interim president, or supporting negotiations among various Venezuelan political factions to form a transitional government. The legitimacy and stability of any such government would be highly uncertain. Fifth, the US would need to address the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela, which would likely worsen in the aftermath of such a capture. Providing humanitarian aid and assisting in the rebuilding of the country's economy would be a significant challenge. Sixth, other nations, particularly in Latin America, would likely be deeply concerned about the precedent set by the US action. It could destabilize the region and embolden other countries to intervene in the affairs of their neighbors. In conclusion, while the hypothetical capture of Nicolás Maduro might appear to offer a quick solution to the political crisis in Venezuela, it would likely unleash a cascade of negative consequences, both within Venezuela and internationally, with unpredictable and potentially devastating results. It's vital to reiterate that this is a hypothetical scenario.